How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, March 1st, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an individual elite profile on Tyreek Hill, who is known by many in the NFL to be the fastest player in the NFL, a very dynamic athlete, and a player who has used his game to completely turn the Kansas City Chiefs offense into what could be one of the most unstoppable offensive weapons in all of NFL history. So, with that said, just to give you a little bit of background, this dude stands at about 5'10". He's 185. He's kind of compact, and most players know that he's one of the fastest players ever. I mean, he competed in the Junior Olympics and won gold in the 2012 or in Barcelona in 2012 in the 4x10 100-meter relay, and he won bronze in the 200 meters at the Junior Olympics as well. So, I mean, that's what he was doing. That's what he was doing in high school. He was one of the. He would go down as Georgia's best track athlete of the year, or he would be Track and Field News High School Athlete of the Year in 2012. He was a USA Today All-American Track and Field selection, but at the end of the day, he did choose to play football. He went to Garden City Community College, and after 1 year, he established himself as good enough to at least make the jump to Oklahoma State, where, of course, he would put up a good season where he put about 800-ish all-purpose yards. But then after a domestic violence dispute, he would get kicked off of Oklahoma State's team, and he would try to salvage what he could on the West Alabama team. And at West Alabama, he established himself as an elite enough prospect to make the jump to the NFL. And of course, even in that pro day, he would run a 4.29 40-yard dash, which is insane when you consider what other players have run. And even like the best players, not many of the best players have been able to put up a 4.29 40-yard dash. And like I said, he established himself as a good enough prospect at West Alabama to be taken in the 5th round of the 2016 draft. He was selected with the 165th overall selection, and he would end up going to the Kansas City Chiefs. And for the Kansas City Chiefs in his very first season in 2016. He would only start one game, but he would play all 16 games in a season where the Kansas City Chiefs would make it to the playoffs, and they lost to the Steelers in the divisional round. This is the year before Patrick Mahomes was starting, and this is when Alex Smith was the starting quarterback. And in that season, from scrimmage, he would finish with 593 yards on 61 receptions. He had 6 receptions through the air. He ran for 267 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground, and gave him 860 total yards from scrimmage and 9 touchdowns. And then, not to mention, just on kicks and punt returns, he would finish with 3 return touchdowns, 3 return touchdowns in the season. That would give him 12 total touchdowns. And with that said, he would go on to be named a Pro Bowler in his very first year in the NFL. He would also be named a first-team All-Pro in his rookie season. This time he would do so as a special teams player because, of course, the NFL had yet to see a player that had his impact and did it the way that he did it. And that would kind of set the stage for what would be an amazing NFL career. Going into his second season in 2017, his age 23 season, he would start 13 games and play 15 in a season where the Chiefs would finish with a 10-6 record. This would be Patrick Mahomes would eventually assume the starting role by the end of the season. They would win the AFC West for the second year in a row. They would make it to the playoffs, of course. That season, Tyreek Hill, as a receiver, would finish with 75 receptions, 1,183 yards, and 7 touchdowns. As of course, he was able to double its receiving output. His rushing yards went down, but yards from scrimmage, he was able to eclipse 1,000 yards for the very first time in his career. He didn't have a rushing touchdown. All his yards were through the air. He had the most receiving touchdowns that he was able to have in a season. And then adding what he did with returns, he had 1 punt return touchdown, so that gave him 8 total touchdowns on the year. He would go on to make his second Pro Bowl in his second year in the league. And then once the Chiefs made the playoffs, they lost the very first game to the Titans. I think this is when Mariota went off and had his wild performance of a game, and then the Chiefs would come up 1 point short and they would miss the playoffs. But of course, Tyreek Hill making the Pro Bowl in his first 2 years. He had made it as a special teams player, I think the second year as well, or in addition to being a wide receiver, and many players were doubting as to whether he was a great pure receiver. And of course, he will go on to prove all of them wrong the very next year. In 2018, in Tyreek Hill's age 24 season, he would start all 16 games. The first time he'd ever play, this is the only time in his career he started 16 games, by the way. He would start all 16 games in a season where the Chiefs would finish with a 12-4 record, the same record that they had when he first got there. And this is when Patrick Mahomes was named the Offensive Player of the Year and the MVP, when he took the entire league by storm, and he threw a bunch of and Patrick Mahomes went insane that year. But in that year, Tyreek Hill was one of the reasons why, as they started to utilize him as one of the main forces on their offense. And in the 16 games he played, he would finish with 87 receptions, the most he'd ever have in a season, I guess tied with this most recent one. He finished with 1,479 yards and 12 receiving touchdowns. He also added 151 yards and 1 rushing touchdown on the ground to give him 1,630 yards from scrimmage, the most yards he'd ever have from scrimmage in a single season. And he also added 13 total touchdowns from scrimmage. And to add on to the fact that he did have a punt return touchdown as well, he had 14 total touchdowns on the season, and he was one of the big reasons why the Chiefs would make it. They would make a deep playoff run with him there. After having the best record in the AFC, they would end up beating the Colts in the divisional playoff round, and then they would lose to the Patriots in the AFC Championship, and this would come down to a coin toss. Of course, the Patriots won, and Tom Brady, being Tom Brady, drove it down the field and scored a touchdown in the very first drive of overtime, not giving the Chiefs a chance to come back. So the Patriots would go on and win that Super Bowl. But the Chiefs were basically right there knocking on the door. And this year, Tyreek Hill would make the Pro Bowl for his third year in a row, and he would make the all-team. He would be an NFL All-Pro wide receiver for the very first time in his career, which of course would shut up the doubters and would continue to establish his career as a great, not just all-purpose player, but as an elite wide receiver, despite standing at about 5'9", 5'10" in the NFL, which of course, great feat for him. This would transition into his age 25 season in 2019, where he would start only 12 games in a season where the Chiefs would finish with a 12-4 record. That season, I guess Tyreek Hill was probably battling a little bit of an injury. I guess he injured his shoulder in the season opener. It was revealed he had a dislocated sternoclavicular joint. He missed some time. He only missed 4 weeks. In the 12 games that he would play, he would finish with 58 receptions for 860 yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. He would finish with 883 yards for scrimmage, along with his 7 total touchdowns on the season. He didn't finish with a return touchdown on the season, as he was more utilized as a wide receiver and less as a returner. But of course, in that season, he would come back and he would be ready for the Chiefs once they made it to the playoffs. Once they made it to the playoffs, they beat the Texans 51-31 after putting up an amazing comeback. Patrick Mahomes went Superman that game, and of course, and Tyreek Hill would have a big game that season. They would end up beating the Tennessee Titans, the team that knocked him out 2 years prior in the AFC Championship, and this is when Derrick Henry was on his game. And then they would end up beating the San Francisco 49ers in Super Bowl 54 after the 49ers were leading at 1 point, I think going into either the third or the fourth quarter. But of course, Tyreek Hill had a big presence there. And in the Super Bowl, he caught 9 passes for 105 yards. Including a 44-yard catch that sparked their comeback that would eventually lead them to win the game. Patrick Mahomes would win the Super Bowl MVP, and for the very first and so far the only time in his career, Tyreek Hill was a Super Bowl champion. And of course, in this season, Even though he played 12 games, he will be named to the Pro Bowl for the fourth time in his 4 years in the NFL, which is, of course, incredibly rare and is, it kind of just sets the ground. And once he was a Super Bowl champion, he would come back for the next year in his age 26 season for 2020, which was this most recent year, which of course with COVID meant that there would be less fans. The NFL let fans in. And in the 2020 NFL season, he would start all 15 games for a Kansas City Chiefs team that would finish with a 14-2 record. That would be the best record that he's had ever since he's been there. And of course, Patrick Mahomes leading the way would help them make it to the playoffs. But in this season, Tyreek Hill, as a receiver, would finish with 87 receptions for 1,276 yards as he had 15 receiving touchdowns on the season. He finished pretty close to the top as he had 1,399 yards from scrimmage. He had 17 total touchdowns from scrimmage as he ran in 2 of his touchdowns as well. As a returner, he didn't have any return touchdowns, but of course, Tyreek Hill once again would be named a Pro Bowler for the 5th time in his NFL career. He'll be named a first-team All-Pro player for the 3rd time in his career, his 2nd time as a wide receiver. And, of course, with this run, they would make it into the playoffs, and we all know how that ended. They beat the Cleveland Browns in the divisional playoffs after having the best record in the AFC. They beat the Bills in the AFC Championship pretty convincingly. And, of course, in the playoffs, Tyreek Hill would have some pretty big performances. Against Cleveland, he had 110 yards on 8 catches. And against the Buffalo Bills, he had 172 yards on his 9 catches. And then in the Super Bowl against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he finished with 73 yards on 7 catches. But the Kansas City Chiefs would fall short to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Super Bowl 55 in Tampa Bay. The Buccaneers would win 31-9 as Tom Brady would win his 7th Super Bowl. And once again, and as it currently stands, Tyreek Hill he was on a Kansas City team that made the Super Bowl the last couple of years. They still hold Patrick Mahomes as one of the best quarterbacks in football. And Tyreek Hill, after being a Pro Bowler for his first 5 seasons in the NFL, and that record's still counting, he's already established himself as one of the best wide receivers in all of football today. Being named as a first-team All-Pro at the wide receiver position means that he is either the best or the second best at his position in the entire NFL. And he's already establishing himself as one of the greatest wide receivers to ever play the game, despite the fact that he's only turning 27 today. I think his numbers, his accolades, and even the fact that this dude is he's a junior Olympic or a junior championship gold medalist, should speak to his amazing feats of athleticism, and the fact that he's able to translate it onto the football field I think it says more than just than words really could. With that said, I do think that Tyreek Hill is an elite player going into the 2021 calendar year and going into this upcoming NFL season. He's definitely going to be a player that I watch. So with that said, I want to thank you all once again for listening to all 14 minutes of this piece. I hope all is well, and if you ever get a chance, check out my boy Tyreek Hill, also known as the Cheetah. That's his Instagram title, or his Instagram tag, as he currently wears number 10 for the Kansas City Chiefs, because as a wide receiver for that offense, he's a 10 out of 10. But with that said, once again, thanks for listening to my piece. I hope all is well, and I will have 2 more individual profiles on Big Ben Roethlisberger, the elite starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Tua Tagovailoa, the young elite quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, tomorrow on March 2nd, 2021, out here in this quarantine. Once again, I want to wish a happy 27th birthday to Tyreek Hill. Once again, today is March 1st, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Peace out.